Greetings and welcome, everyone, to the Art and Science of Awareness. This is our monthly interview series in which we speak with researchers working on the cutting edge of mindfulness science. I'm John Roberts from Living Well Community, your home for interactive virtual wellness classes and on-demand programming created and curated for you by Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and Tufts Health Plan. Now, I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Tara Healy, the founder and director of Mind the Moment, the mindfulness program of Harvard Pilgrim and Tufts Health Plan, and our very special guest, Chris Germer. Now, Chris is a clinical psychologist and lecturer at Harvard Medical School. He co-developed the Mindful Self-Compassion program with Kristin Neff back in 2010. Been taught to over 250,000 people worldwide since then. Now, with Kristin Neff, Chris wrote his latest book, Mindful Self-Compassion for Burnout, Tools to Help You Heal and Recharge when you're wrung out by stress. He is also the author of The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion, and he co-edited Mindfulness and Psychotherapy, as well as Wisdom and Compassion in Psychotherapy. He lives in beautiful Cambridge, Massachusetts. Welcome, Chris. Great to be with you today.
Thank you, John.
Now, folks, we want you to be a part of this conversation as well. So please take a moment to open up the chat. Do let us know your thoughts and questions as they arise at any point throughout today's program. But in the meantime, Tara, let me invite you to take us away.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Chris, for your willingness to join this series that we're doing. It's really such a pleasure to have you as our guest today. And let's go ahead and jump right in. So my first question is really, if you could tell us, what was the initial spark for you to even begin this journey of mindful self-compassion, and maybe personally and professionally, kind of what inspired this?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on and for the question. So I've been practicing mindfulness most of my adult life. I started when I was about 25. What happened back in 2006 was that after 20 years of struggling with public speaking anxiety, I figured out how to solve that problem, and that was with self-compassion, which I had no clue about before that. So what self-compassion allowed me to do was to hold myself as a person who basically, shook like a leaf in front of an audience, hold myself in a loving and kind and compassionate way as an imperfect human being who could not stand up in front of an audience without, stumbling. So that was amazing to me. And I'm a clinical psychologist as well. And after that, I started looking at so much in mental health through the lens of self-compassion. And then I met Kristin Neff, who's the pioneering researcher in self-compassion. And then we created this training program, and it's really been nonstop from there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And, I think so many people can relate to your story, the anxiety of public speaking. I mean, I think that for most of us at different times in our life, it's quite there. It's present. And to see how you are able to bring this capacity for self-compassion in is beautiful and really led you on quite a journey. And I'm excited because we're going to save time at the end for you to actually lead us in about a 10-minute practice. But I want to follow up that question by just asking you to define mindfulness and define compassion, because there are a lot of definitions of mindfulness. I think they generally point to the same thing. But for the purpose of our conversation over the next, half hour or so, how do you define both mindfulness and compassion?
Yeah, so a common definition of mindfulness is moment-to-moment awareness of our experience with acceptance. But in order to contrast mindfulness with self-compassion, I'd like to say mindfulness is loving awareness of moment-to-moment experience, And self-compassion is loving awareness of the experiencer. So mindfulness is focused on what we're feeling moment to moment, like this thought, this emotion, this sensation. Compassion is mostly one sentient being to another. It's about the person, it's personal. And so self-compassion is basically holding ourselves in loving awareness. And what I found from the public speaking experience is that what was really behind it was shame. And I was unable to hold the shame in loving awareness until I could hold myself in loving awareness. So ultimately, I think that mindfulness and self-compassion are complementary. They're like two wings of a bird, friends forever. They really go together very well. And the research shows this as well. Together, they are powerful formula for emotion regulation.
Yeah, so interesting. So, Chris, did the mindfulness, this capacity to see what's going on with receptivity or a kind of allowance, help you to see the underlying emotion of shame? And I imagine that could be, who knows what might be underlying for all of us. Shame was what it was for you, could be for many of us. But was it mindfulness that helped you see that?
Yeah. So only mindfulness did not, so I was practicing mindfulness for 20 years and I thought I had an anxiety disorder. I really had a shame disorder. I was afraid that people would think I was stupid or fraudulent or incompetent because I was shaking while trying to give a speech about mindfulness, So, so I actually was not able to see the shame until I started to practice self-compassion. But a key element of self-compassion, according to Kristin Neff, there are 3 components to it. And a key component, in fact, some people consider the first component, is mindfulness. So the 3 components are mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. Okay. So in order to be compassionate, first we need to actually know what we're feeling. We have to be able to say, hey, this hurts. In the case of public speaking, I wasn't actually able to see the shame. I knew I was suffering, but I couldn't see the shame. And I couldn't address the shame until I could love myself. And so mindfulness is definitely part of the self-compassion process. But sometimes, from my experience, we need to add this other element of basically loving ourselves up in order to be mindful.
Yeah. Chris, thank you. I mean, I really appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability. And I think that in itself is really instructive around this practice. So let's talk a little bit before we move into practice about what the research is showing us, because I think it could be easy to get caught up in, does this really work? If I'm offering, does this really work? Like, what are you seeing that kind of gives us some data points that this is a good thing to do, that this matters, this will help?
Well, there are a lot of data points at this point. The first research study was in 2003 when Kristin Neff published an article describing her model, as well as published the self-compassion scale, which is used in most of the research. But now there are at least 9,000 articles in the academic and professional literature on self-compassion. So the number of articles is growing geometrically, just like mindfulness. I think there are probably 35,000 articles in mindfulness, about 9,000 in self-compassion, because self-compassion started 20 years later. But in a nutshell, the research shows that self-compassion is a powerful formula for emotion regulation and emotional resilience. In other words, coping. So, pretty much across the board, it seems like a kind of a core underlying factor in mental health and well-being. So, for example, it increases in the category of well-being, it increases happiness, life satisfaction, coping, emotional intelligence, wisdom. Actually, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
But it also decreases anxiety, depression, stress, shame. And it also has a very positive impact on health. When in a moment of self-compassion, usually our immune system is working better. Self-compassion is closely related to healthy lifestyle, like, eating better, exercising more, and also more satisfying relationships. In other words, when people are self-compassionate, they when they grow in self-compassion, they tend to be more compassionate toward others, which is essential for relationships. So the research is pretty vast at this point. Anything you're interested in, you can find a handful of studies that will support that in terms of self-compassion, impact of self-compassion.
So, Chris, the other thing before we move into practice that do you come across people feeling they don't deserve it? That there's, and even allotting the time for oneself. And how do you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that's a very natural reaction. In fact, if we felt we deserved self-compassion, we would probably be giving it to ourselves, and then we wouldn't need to learn it. In other words, life is so more abundant. Life is constantly giving us one kind of affirmation or another when we're able to hear it. So we push it away. So let's assume, for starters, that most people feel, at least in some aspects of their lives, undeserving of self-compassion. Unlike children, by the way, we learn that we're not deserving of self-compassion by how we've been treated in this world and by culture. But everybody can learn self-compassion. And one of the easiest ways is to ask ourselves how we would treat a friend. Because no matter what's happened to us in life, we inevitably are compassionate towards some being somehow, even if it's pets and children and dolphins and so forth. And when we mobilize that energy of compassion for others, then self-compassion is simply about kind of slipping ourselves in. In other words, just an informal definition of self-compassion is treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding as we'd treat a good friend. But it doesn't have to be anything big. It could be something really small, like if we're struggling, like say you had a tough day at work, giving yourself permission when you get home to do a little gardening. That's what we call behavioral self-compassion. Everybody can do it. So even if the idea of caring for ourselves stresses us out because we think we don't deserve it, we actually have been caring for ourselves in life, or we wouldn't be adults. And the self-compassionate thing is to do that for ourselves when we're struggling.
Nice. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think the Dalai Lama was once asked in an interview about the lack of self-compassion. He didn't understand culturally for us, but didn't really even understand the question. It was so foreign to him. So let's go ahead and move into a 10-minute practice with you, Chris. So I'll just have you take it from here and guide us in practices that it sounds like we can do some of this on our own at home.
Yeah.
Or anywhere. It's
portable. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So the practice I'm thinking about is called the self-compassion break. And it's based on the 3 components of self-compassion, starting with mindfulness, then common humanity, and then self-kindness. And because there are these 3 components, there are even different aspects of each component. And so I'm going to guide you through it. And if there's any aspect that it particularly touches you or seems to shift something, you can do that in your daily life. So this is kind of a smorgasbord practice, but it's short and it's easily applied in your daily life. So it's called the self-compassion break. And usually we practice self-compassion break when when we feel under stress, when we're confronted with a problem. And so now, for the sake of this exercise, I'd like you to think of a problem in your life. So if you can, not a big problem right now, but say a mild to moderate problem. Maybe there's a health issue that's cooking. Maybe there's a relationship problem. Maybe there's a work difficulty. So please think about a problem in your life. And then, if you like, you can close your eyes fully or partially and see if you can feel your way into the situation. In other words, thinking about if there are any people involved in this situation, visualizing them, or any words shared. Visualize the setting. So just kind of getting close to the problem right now so that you can feel it. And since this is a problem, since this is stressful, inevitably some discomfort will arise. So this is actually a radical step, being willing to feel some discomfort. And this is also mindfulness, the capacity to be with what we're feeling in the moment. So for starters, seeing if you can validate how you feel. In other words, just to say to yourself in a kind way, as you might to a friend, this is stressful. This is uncomfortable. This hurts. Can you say that to yourself in a validating way, like, yeah, this is not easy. So that's already mindfulness, loving awareness of your experience, validating. And now see if you can drop into your body a little more and notice when you think about this problem, where you feel it the most in your body. So it could be a kind of tension in your chest or your gut or your jaw, or your neck. Maybe a sense of emptiness or queasiness. Where do you feel this situation the most in your body? So this is also mindfulness, body awareness, and see if you can also make some room for the experience. In other words, let it be there, if only for this one moment. Maybe even say, just letting go of the resistance for a moment. So all of this is mindful awareness. And now shifting to part 2, common humanity, seeing if you can allow the experience to be there because it's part of being human. In other words, stress is part of everyone's life. The details are unique for each of us, but we all struggle. We all feel stress. We all have problems. So just taking a moment to allow that to be so, that when you struggle, like around this problem, you may feel very much alone, but actually you're not. Others struggle in similar ways. In fact, many people who are in exactly the same situation as you would probably feel similarly. just taking a moment to see the size of the cloth, as it were, that stress and struggle and suffering is part of the human experience. Allowing yourself in this moment to be human. Letting your experience be as it is. And then finally, the third component, self-kindness. So there are many ways that we can be kind to ourselves. So I'm just going to invite you to try two of those. And the first is with compassionate touch. So if you like, and it feels comfortable to you, you can put a hand on the part of your body that seems to hold stress the most. So for example, it might be on your forehead, or it could be your neck, or your chest, or your abdomen. But just placing a hand there, and just feeling the sense of touch, feeling the warmth. If you like, even in your mind, allowing kindness and compassion to flow through your fingertips into this part of your body that's holding stress for you, that is doing this service for you. And if you like, you can even gently massage that part of your body. So basically offering yourself touch in a way that feels genuinely comforting or soothing. And as you do this, giving yourself permission to be comforted and soothed by touch. And then lastly, asking yourself, if somebody were to whisper into my ear right now some words that I'd really like to hear, maybe even that I need to hear in the midst of a problem like this, what would those words be? So for example, somebody might say to you, I feel for you, this is difficult. I'm here with you. I'm here for you. You've got this. You can do this. You have what it takes. I trust you. I believe in you. I love you. Are there any words in particular that if they were whispered into your ear right now, your heart would rest? You would feel, thank you. And if a few words arise for you, giving yourself permission to allow those words right now to roll through your mind. Maybe even to land inside your heart. Permission to hear those words over and over a few times. Receiving these words like a gift or a blessing, something you need to hear. And notice how it feels inside when you say these words. Okay, and now beginning to release the practice, just keeping your eyes closed for one more moment. And just taking a moment to reflect whether there was any aspect of this practice that touched you or moved you or shifted something inside of you. And if so, whether it would make sense when you're actually in the situation itself in your daily life, whether it makes sense to remember this and even to do this little practice, even for 30 seconds. And then before we close, just allowing your experience of this practice, the whole practice, to be as it was, just as it was, and giving yourself permission, if only for this one precious moment, giving yourself permission to be just as you are. Just as you are, just like this, fully human. And then when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes.
Thank you, Chris. That that was wonderful. I could call a situation pretty quickly. It's with a family member where I have some difficulty and challenge, and I think what I came to especially was at the end the words, and there's something, what was dropping in was, it's actually okay that you have these feelings.
How nice. How nice. Thank
You
you.
know, it's actually okay. And I think just the capacity also to be with resistance to unpleasantness, you know, just holding the unpleasantness with a kind of, I mean, allowance is the word, that just allow, be with. And I appreciated your calling out what was mindfulness. This is mindfulness. And then, because we can see really how these two interface. Yeah.
So usually we need to give ourselves permission to feel what we're feeling, and we also need to give ourselves permission to feel the struggle, but also in this case, as you described, Tara, permission to be kind to yourself, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yes.
and even just permission to feel what you're feeling.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Really nice. Let's bring John back and see John.
Chris, what I really loved about this practice was the compassionate touch part. I suppose that once one gets a little bit of experience in doing this practice in a more formalized setting like we just were doing, then probably you can sort of call up just the compassionate touch part in one's life, which I think must be very productive, because I'm imagining if I'm like in an elevator and I'm needing that compassionate moment, I'm not going to just like, okay, I need to stay here for 10 minutes and do this whole thing. But if I practice sort of just the compassionate touch part, I could call that up in that moment, and maybe even bring in all of the power of the practice into just that touch.
Well, it's interesting, John, two things. First of all, when something big and even shocking happens to us, we naturally give ourselves compassion touch. We go, so we're really just like allowing ourselves to do that consciously. But the other thing is, there's research that was done in Germany that showed that when we give ourselves compassionate touch, it actually lowers the stress hormone cortisol as much as when somebody else hugs us.
Wow.
And then follow-up research at Berkeley showed that when you do this, people who do this for 20 seconds a day, some form of touch, 20 seconds a day, over 1 month, have significantly less stress, significantly less anxiety, depression, and significantly more self-compassion. 20 seconds a day. So this is not complicated, but we just need to remember. We need to remember to be kind to ourselves. We need to give ourselves permission to be kind to ourselves when we struggle.
What I hear you pointing out, Chris, is that these mindfulness practices are really just getting us back to instinctual things, that we are just trying to formalize or operationalize these things that we would be doing otherwise if perhaps we didn't have so many, let's say, societal obstacles standing in our way. But
That's a nice way of saying it. I mean, even the way that young children are dazzled by the world. I mean, isn't that kind of what we're trying to do when we practice mindfulness? We would like to be, re-dazzled. We want to give ourselves permission to see the uniqueness of every moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Be like children in that way, but wise.
Yes. Yes.
Tara, may I ask
Yeah.
a closing question? I know we're out of time
Yeah.
here, but Chris, there's
Yeah,
something
yeah.
that's just been on my mind throughout this whole conversation. So some years ago, you gave an interview in which you said, "I think we're at the beginning of a great wave of compassion." And I think, well, let me just say, a lot of people I know are looking around at the world and saying that they might call that into question, that we are at the beginning of a great wave of compassion. I'm just curious, do you have have you revised your thoughts on that? And if not, how are you staying so compassionate when so much is swirling around us that may seem to be the opposite of that?
Oh, that's a nice question. Yeah. So when I can recall that I said such a thing, and I was really referring to new interest in this secular training of compassion. Not that we were necessarily, the world was going to necessarily be more compassionate. But then the question is, how do we maintain compassion in a world that appears to be full of chaos and, frankly, a lot of unnecessary cruelty? Well, that is, in fact, the best opportunity to practice self-compassion, because when we suffer because of how other people suffer, when we suffer because things are happening to us directly, the most natural thing that we can do is to be kind to ourselves first. And what we've also found is that this is also the easiest way to be compassionate toward others. Usually when we want to be more compassionate toward others, we kind of say, "Ooh, I want to," we struggle. But just like falling in love, we can fall into compassion for ourselves. And that then warms up our awareness, and then we can include others in the circle of our compassion. So this is paradoxically a really powerful way of dealing not only with our own stress, but also being more helpful in a world that desperately needs compassion.
That's a beautiful sentiment,
Yeah.
and I think a wonderful thing to close on. Tara, may I allow you to take us out?
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the things that really strikes me too, Chris, is common humanity. Just the recognition that we all desire to feel connected, to feel loved, to be healthy, to be happy. These are universal, and very few, if any of us, fall outside of that. And so I really appreciate the speaking to our common humanity, and for you guiding us in this practice, that I think there are so many pieces of it that we can take away and do on our own. So thank you, Chris, so much for your time today. And thank you, everybody who has joined us. Really appreciate everyone being here in this community. So I think we can sign off.
Thank you.